Hello everyone, my name is Dakoba and welcome back to Satisfactory. Today we're taking a look at how to get some early hard drives by exploring the easiest drop pods near each spawn point in the game. Finding these hard drives early is useful for unlocking some powerful early game recipes like iron wire or cast screws, since which alternate recipes you can get from hard drives is determined by which milestones you have completed, which makes this very valuable to do before you get too far into the game. Let's get into it. First up, we're going to head to the Grassy Plains, where our first drop pod is at the eastern edge of the region near a large crater. This drop pod takes 12 screws to open and is guarded by 2 hatchers and 2 hogs. The drop pod site also contains wires and circuit boards for the taking. Our next pod is located about 400 meters straight north of the large arch at the center of the plains. This pod requires 40 megawatts of power to open, so you can either run a line from your main generators or bring the materials for it, a couple biomass burners and a power pole to spot power to it. This pod is guarded by a single spitter, and the site contains wires, reinforced iron plates, and motors. Next, we have a pod on the large island in the southwest edge of the area. This pod is going to require 5 modular frames to open, and is guarded by 2 hogs with a boss hog on the island as well. The site also contains wires and screws that you can loop. Next, we'll head into the bluffs on the western edge of the area for another pod, which requires 1 quick wire. You can get this using the Caterium vein on a nearby waterfall island, and some research in the man. This pod is not guarded, and the site contains wire and circuit boards for looting. On those same waterfall islands, you'll find another pod requiring 5 modular frames to open. This pod is also not guarded, and the site also contains wires and screws. Heading to the Rocky Desert starting area, we're going to find our first pod just north of the small lake in the south central portion of the map. This pod requires 30 megawatts of power to open, so it can be powered by a single biomass burner. This pod is guarded by 2 hatchers, and the site contains wires, circuit boards, and screws. Our next pod is located about 400 meters west in the middle of the desert and requires 21 rotors to open. This pod is guarded by 2 hogs, and the site contains screws, modular frames, and cable. Next, we have a pod located atop the large central pillar in the middle of the Rocky Desert, which requires 4 rotors to open. This pod is guarded by a spitter and a hatcher, as well as several poison plants. The site also contains modular frames. Heading north to the cliffside, we'll find a pod which requires 9 modular frames. Now this pod is guarded by 2 spitters, and the site also contains the 9 modular frames that you need to open the pod, as well as reinforced iron plates and some screws. Further north, on the northern beach at the edge of the map, we'll find another pod that requires 30 megawatts of power to open, which is guarded by 2 hatchers. The site also contains modular frames, heavy modular frames, reinforced iron plates, screws, and motors. Finally, in the northwestern edge of the region, we'll find another pod near the cliffside, which requires 4 rotors to open and is guarded by just 2 hatchers. Turning our attention to the northern forest, our first drop pod is located at the base of the large bone arches on the eastern end of the zone. This pod requires 30 megawatts of power to open and is guarded by 2 hogs. The drop site loot for this pod are modular frames, wires, and reinforced iron plates. On the eastern end of the zone is a pod crashed near a pond which requires 50 megawatts of power to open and is also guarded by some hogs. This drop site also contains wires and cable for looting. At the northern edge of the forest on the cliffside, you'll find a pod that requires a single rotor to open. It's guarded by hogs and poison flowers, although by the time I got to this pod, the poison flowers had actually killed the hogs, so I just had to deal with the poison. Taking in some berries, I was able to get it no problem. And the site also contains reinforced iron plates and cable. At the south end of the northern forest, on some cliffs across a chasm from the main forest, sits another drop pod that requires only 25 megawatts of power to open. This pod is guarded by 2 hogs, so be mindful of their knockback near the cliff, and the drop site contains modular frames, wires, screws, and circuit boards. Finally, in the northwest of the region, there is a pod on the shore of a small pond, requiring 1 modular frame to open. This is guarded by 2 hogs, and the drop site contains wires, screws, and reinforced iron plates. Our final starting area is the Dune Desert, and our first pod here is located in the very center of the desert, crashed into the base of an outcropping. The pod has no requirements, but is guarded by 2 spitters, and the crash site contains modular frames, reinforced iron plates, screws, and motors. Heading west to the cliffs at the edge of the desert, we'll find a pod that requires 10 rotors and is guarded by 1 spitter. The drop site also contains some screws and modular frames. At the northern end of the desert, among the arches, is a pod that requires 50 megawatts of power to open. There are no enemies guarding this pod, but you can still loot some wires, screws, and modular frames here. At the very northern edge of the map, we'll find another pod which is unguarded and has no requirements to open, but also doesn't have any loot with it. And finally, at the northern lake in the desert, on a small island, is a pod that requires 70 megawatts of power to open. There are several poison flowers nearby, although there are no other enemies, and you can actually reach the pod without taking any damage. There is, however, no extra loot beyond the hard drive for reaching this one. Now, of course, this is just a sampling of the pods that are available in the game. There's nearly 100 in all, but these ones are critical for getting some valuable alternate recipes early in the game before you're equipped for a more thorough exploration of the map. And that's going to do it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you have, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. My name is Ben Dakoba, and I hope you have an efficient day.